Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. My name is Ian Rowe.
Hello, I'm Nique Fajors.
Nique, great to see you as always. And as our guests know, we love to highlight the efforts of some amazing Black men who are just doing wonderful work. And the world needs to know more about what these gentlemen are up to. And we have a great guest today, the indomitable Erec Smith, who has shown bravery and courage over the last 5 years in speaking out on some pretty thorny issues that we're going to talk a little bit about today. When I first met Erec, it was as the founder, one of the founders of Free Black Thought, very important initiative, which we'll talk about. And at the time was a assistant professor at York College of Pennsylvania as a professor of rhetoric, which it turns out, and we're going to learn more about it, he is no longer there. But now Erec is a research fellow at the Cato Institute. So Erec, great to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we get into the Erec Smith of today, the trailblazer, the public intellectual, let's just talk about you when you were younger. And when you first discovered that race was a thing, that somehow your skin color had meaning, either negatively or positively, to people.
Well, I was in the third grade, and as somebody, as a white student, I was at a predominantly white school in a predominantly white neighborhood. So I noticed my difference at a very young age, but the whole race thing, I didn't realize until a student said something to me about my skin color, and it was totally innocuous. And I think I agreed with him or something like that, and I kept going. And another friend of mine, came up to me and said, "You're supposed to be upset about that. That's race. He's trying to piss you off. Pardon my French. He's trying to anger you. You're supposed to be upset about that." And that's when my life went downhill, because now I'm upset about all these things I wasn't upset about before, and I'm miserable. And that's how I learned about the race issues in America.
Got it.
And Erec, was it another Black child that said to you, "Hey, you're supposed to be upset about that"?
Puerto Rican.
Isn't that perfect?
Do you remember what he said? Do you remember what it was?
No, I don't. I wish I did.
Probably something that was innocuous and got you upset, and that is the story. That is the story of race in America. Got it. Okay, so all right, so you had that experience, and then do you remember how that then shaped you in subsequent interactions, either with that kid or now? Did you now have a chip on your shoulder?
Yes.
Because.
Yeah.
So how did that manifest?
And how did it manifest? I wasn't angry outwardly, at all or anything like that. It was just a new awareness that kind of tainted my experience at that school and in the world. So it's not like I became militant or anything like that. I just became aware, or as the kids used to say, woke.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because being woke, being woke, as opposed to like a verb or taking action, being woke is being aware, right?
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to have negative connotations, right?
Right.
So what did being woke back then mean to you?
You said it, just awareness of what's going on behind the scenes, as it were, right? You realize that there's more there's more to something than meets the eye, right? And you keep that in mind, and that's what I used to mean by woke. When I used to use it as a neutral term and not something that was politically packed, right? Obviously now the word has taken on another life.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting because being woke could just mean I'm aware, and like for example, if in the way you're talking about it, I and certainly Nike and you have committed at least a part of your life to addressing issues that we are now woke about, right?
Yes.
Disparities,
Yes.
lack of opportunity, lack of access. These are real opportunities. These are real issues that we care about, right?
Right. Right.
So then,
And yeah.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, yeah, we care about them, and what we're supposed to do is, now that we care about them, expose them so that everybody else can see, so that everybody is more informed and things like that. So you're supposed to, as a woke person, you're supposed to make sure other people get woke too.
Right, but now it's not just about that. There's a particular course of action you're supposed to
Yes.
take, right? So okay,
Yes.
let's stay on the side of woke, which is just awareness, because you built the early part of your career, right? Trying to address these issues. You even took on a role of focusing on DEI. So let's stay in that mindset when you were trying to address these issues in a way that you thought still treated people as individuals, not just as avatars, right? So talk about that period of your life in college and afterwards.
Sure. This was the late aughts, around mid aughts actually. 2006 to 2008, I was a chief diversity officer at a small liberal arts college on the East Coast. We didn't call it DEI back then. It wasn't diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was just diversity. And I embraced the kind of diversity work that appreciated classical liberal values like individuality, right? Like the primacy of reason, like free speech, and things like that. Um, the issue I saw wasn't with those values. It was the fact that not everybody's allowed to enjoy those values, right? So I wanted to, bring awareness to that, and, do the whole equality and, all men are created equal thing, right? That's where I was.
Sexist statement.
Now, I was just quoting. I didn't write it down. I was just quoting somebody
Okay.
else.
All right.
Yeah. So, but all that being said, I'm not here to say that my way of doing things was perfect. Um, After a while, I realized that nothing was really coming to fruition, right? I kept talking to the same 5 or 6 people, nothing was really required, so nobody had to show up. And I was this non-tenured, professor who took on this extra role, and nobody really took it seriously. I found myself repeating myself a lot because there was nothing else to say other than
Well,
what I
wait,
had
wait.
already said.
Who were these 5 or 6 people? Were they the egregious oppressors that were running around campus?
They were other professors, some students who cared about diversity and would show up sometimes because they really wanted to, learn some things, and sometimes just to support me because they saw how things weren't really working out either.
So did you
In
get the
your writing,
impression?
oh, sorry, go ahead,
Go ahead.
Ian.
No, go
I was
ahead.
saying, Eric, in your writing, I saw a reference to a statement that really resonated with me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that DEI is not an extension of the civil rights movement.
No, not at
That's
all.
such an important point to be made.
It is the point to be made, in my opinion. A lot of people see one person or a group of people railing against DEI, and they think, okay, how can you be against diversity, equity, and inclusion in the original sense of those words, right? So suddenly somebody who is really trying to push back on illiberalism is seen as illiberal, right? And confusion ensues. When in reality, this version of DEI, the woke version of DEI, is more critical social justice than anything else. And when I say critical social justice, that is not social justice. Critical social justice is the whole systemic racism thing, oppressor versus oppressed framing of everything, right? A wicked combination of cultural Marxism and postmodern theory being applied to this stuff. This is the problematic stuff. This is the stuff that promotes the suppression of free speech, right? This is the kind of stuff that promotes group consciousness instead of the individual. In fact, individualism is seen as a white way of knowing, right? This is the problem. You know, some of these EOs that Trump is putting out, it's about critical social justice, not about diversity, equity, and inclusion as, say, the civil rights movement would have defined those terms.
So
Yeah,
why do you
great
think
point.
we did? Yeah, go ahead, keep follow up.
No, well, a story that you told in one of your essays talks about there was a racial incident on campus, and tell the story. You asked what happened and what was
Yeah,
the result of that. It just speaks to what you just described.
exactly. There is an organization in my field of rhetoric and composition, and the organization, there was a meeting, the board or something like that, and some professors were invited to talk about a revision of some of the policies and things like that. And apparently something racist happened in this meeting. It turns out that the racist thing was just that they disagreed with the people of color about something. But anyway, something racist happened during this meeting, and the person who was involved in this, a leader in the field, called for us to boycott the organization.
Oh God.
The Council of Writing Program Administrators. Okay, we're supposed to boycott, and I said, okay, well, if I'm going to boycott this very important organization, I want to know what happened. I'm not just going to do it because you tell me to do it. So I did something egregious and awful. I said, what happened? And and the vitriol that resulted from that was, well, typical wokeness.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just such a beautiful example of the stupidity that underpins that mentality.
Yeah.
No focus, no examination, no critical thinking, traditional use of the phrase. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And again, I was the odd person out. Nobody else was speaking up about this. And I mean, it became clear, and I did make this known. I did make this known that DEI, as we're calling it, isn't about helping Black people. It's about helping certain kinds of Black people, the politically Black people. I didn't count, and I just wanted somebody to admit that finally. But obviously, that didn't happen. But it opened my eyes even more than they were already open.
You know, Eric, as you described your role when you were a chief diversity officer, that almost feels like maybe where DEI will eventually settle back to practical, thoughtful, and diversity defined in the broadest context. An engineer with a political scientist with a writer, and bringing a diversity of ideas, not, I'm Black and you're Chinese, and thus.
Right.
And sorry, Ian, because I know you've got some comments, but as you think about DEI being on the ropes and these executive orders that you referenced, how might we envision DEI making a comeback? There's lots of money involved here. People's life their life worth, their life experiences, they put everything into being a DEI expert. They're not going to go down lightly. How do you expect them to respond to what has sort of taken place in our country over the last 2 weeks?
I think the letters D, E, and I have been tainted to the point of no return. If we came out and said, okay, we're going back to, classical liberal diversity or something like that, I don't think people would listen, or they see the word diversity and assume it's the problematic version that's being stifled right now. So I don't know. I mean, we definitely can't call it diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, that's for sure. We may have to introduce it in a different way, not to say, oh, we need to help these minorities have a chance at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Perhaps we focus on a particular thing, like African Americans or people of color in a certain industry and what's going on there, right? And focus it instead of this broad idea of D, E, and I. And that's just off the top of my head.
Yeah.
In reality, I don't really know.
Almost sounds like an Operation Push for the 21st century. Sort of, we're going to squeeze corporations and try to get some jobs and try to get some things done. But at the end of the day, it's still a guilt trip. But it's very focused. It's on corporations or something. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see. Very interesting.
I mean, Nique, I think you're right, but I mean, I'm not sure if the people who are believing in DEI aren't still going to keep pushing their particular strand of it. I mean, Ibram Kendi just got booted from Boston University, right? Had raised $55 million and evidently nothing really to show for it. BU, closes the shop, but now Howard University has taken him in. And you do see these efforts now. You see, efforts around belonging. Like you see these different words being used to couch what seems like similar behaviors, don't you, Erec?
Yeah, it is similar. We've gotten to the point where people say diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging now, right? Just to drive home the idea that people of color don't feel like they belong in certain spaces. A lot of times, though, that is self-imposed. People aren't, stifling you or treating you like you don't belong. You are so afraid that you will be treated like you don't belong that you already project that behavior out onto people, right? So a lot of people, for example, in my field, the person who accused the organization of racism but didn't tell people what happened, right? He said that a lot of students of color, when they walk into a classroom, are quote unquote suffocated by whiteness. And I'm like, okay, suffocated by whiteness? Why don't you just walk in the classroom, sit down, and learn? All right. The other kids, the other students in the class aren't paying tuition to mess with you. They're there to learn. They're there to improve themselves in some way, right? But your suffocation by whiteness is self-imposed. You're putting that on yourself.
Erec, as you were talking about that, Ian, I reflected back on our time at Harvard Business School from 1991 to 1993. I'll just want to tell a quick story. Ian was one who didn't allow for any suffocation. He became the first, not that we are into first, but the first Black person to ever be the editor, correct me if I'm wrong, of the business school newspaper. He wasn't looking to create a separate newspaper for Black students because he felt suffocated by the majority paper.
Yeah.
But there were, I'll never forget, there was a student, I remember talking to him. He's a classmate of ours, very bright, from the West Coast originally. He was telling me how we're not welcomed here and the cases aren't about us and the professors don't look like us. And it's a stifling environment. Now, I think in 1991, there was maybe 25% truth to that there was some energy on campus but you have two choices. You act like Ian Rowe and take leadership of an institution at the school and contribute to the betterment of the school, or you sit on the sidelines and complain about how stifled you are. But 32 years later, there are so many examples of how much more welcoming these institutions are, that it's and I don't want to sound like the old guy saying we had it tough and it's so easy now, but all the data I see suggests that.
Yeah, me too. I agree 100% with what you just said. Things have gotten a lot better. Are they perfect? No, but they've gotten a lot better. And it's my biggest fear is actually, this isn't a big fear actually. It's a complaint because we were moving. We were making moves. We were improving, and then this DEI stuff happened, and it pushed us backwards. You know what I mean?
I
Um,
absolutely.
and I not to I don't want to speak ill or flippantly of the dead here, but when George Floyd was murdered, that people's eyes were opened. That's when everybody was woke in the original sense, right? People were willing to help and listen, right? More than ever in my lifetime, anyway. And
True.
we took that opportunity and we blew it. We blew it. Instead of listening or having them listen or having white people help with diversity, equity, inclusion and do their best and work with them, we pushed them away. We alienated them. We called them inherently oppressors, right? We started calling normal things white ways of knowing. It's like they were trying to fail. You know what I mean? I mean, you
Yeah.
have to. What did you think was going to happen when you accuse every white person of inherent racism, right? And you victimize every person of color, and you talk about things like microaggressions and implicit bias. What
Yeah.
did you think was going to happen? Eventually, everybody was going to turn against you, right? And now we have these EOs coming out saying you can't have diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sadly, I fear that the baby will be thrown out with the bathwater in a lot of ways. Um, but this was bound to happen,
Yeah.
and otherwise intelligent people have grabbed hold of this critical social justice as if it is the way of the future. And it couldn't have been a worse idea.
I interviewed
Yeah, Eric,
Shelby Steele. No, I
go
was
ahead,
about to say,
Ian,
I
please.
interviewed Shelby Steele a few years ago, and he made the point that the greatest challenge facing the Black community is not racism, but actually freedom. It's this really
Yes.
profound statement, right? And he said,
Hmm.
because it's almost as if there's a segment of the Black community that derives its power from using racism, right, as its main lever of control, main lever of influence, because freedom is scary. Freedom is risky.
Yeah.
Freedom comes with the possibility of not being successful and, frankly, not having someone else to blame. What do
Right.
you think about that?
Right. I agree 100%. He Steele said he had a term, integration shock. Was the term he used, and basically what that was once things doors started opening up, right, that were closed for so long for Black people. People were afraid to walk through those doors because now they had nothing to fall back on. Now, if they failed, it wasn't the white man's fault because they have freedom, right? And that that was scary to a lot of people, and I still think that's going on to a large degree, right? I think a lot of people, and I said this earlier in this conversation, a lot of people are projecting, that fear on the people who have no intention of oppressing them or
Mm-hmm.
stealing resources from them or something like that, right? That's not happening. But we project it onto the world, and suddenly the world is this racist place.
Eric,
Okay.
Ian introduced you as an associate professor of rhetoric and I understand that there's been some updates in your role as an associate professor. What's taken place?
I no longer have that role. I resigned from academia at large because of all this woke nonsense, right? And I initially wanted to stay because I was one of the few voices in my field, the only voice, um, speaking back against these things, trying to do something, to reintroduce classical liberalism into the liberal arts. I could not do that. It was too much. Being behind enemy lines was harder than I imagined it would be, and I thought it would be hard. So I figured I can do more on the outside than I can on the inside. This academia doesn't like me anymore. My field doesn't like me. Right? I'm the wrong kind of black person, so I'm not going to stay here. I gave up tenure, which is crazy and keeps me up at night sometimes. But I think it was the best move.
I mean, can you speak a little bit to was there an event that was the proverbial, broke the camel's back? Like, it was what? How does that manifest itself? What is it that you represent to these people in academia that was just so threatening to them? What is it?
Um, it was somebody who refused to be a victim, and it's somebody who had great faith in his own agency, right? All these things flew in the face of the narrative they were trying to push, the narrative of oppressor, oppressed, right? The the master, the slave, whatever kind of
Yeah,
dichotomy
power
you want to
dynamic.
use there. Yeah, I was refusing that and speaking back against that with my skin color was also a big deal for them. They really had to come after me, right? They can accuse a white guy of racism and stuff like that. They can accuse me of internalized racism, but it still doesn't hit the same, right? I was um I was told I didn't understand the damage my body was doing
Mm.
by saying these things. I was told that in all seriousness, right? So again, there's a certain kind of black person that academia likes. I wasn't that kind of person.
I mean, it makes my blood boil. But maybe we're seeing a shift. Are you optimistic around, just given everything going on? Do you feel, what, I made the right move personally, but also I'm seeing the narrative and mindsets shift?
Um, I'm seeing it shift, yes. I don't know about academia. I think in academia, things are the same way they were before November 5th of 2024. And that's going to be a heavier lift to get the DEI out of that space. But obviously, corporate America, other institutions are getting rid of the stuff. They're realizing how detrimental it is, and they're pushing it aside. My only fear, and I said this earlier, is that the baby is being thrown out with the bathwater, which is to say that, things that were in place before the DEI explosion are going to be thrown out, right? I don't think it's a bad idea to have a, you know, black student union or something like that, as long as, you know, uh, they're not segregating themselves or something like that. And people who aren't black can come and learn some
Right,
things, right?
right.
I mean, that was fine, but is that going to be thrown out now? I'm concerned about that.
No, it's a good call out, Eric. One of the things I've been thinking about in terms of the baby in the bathwater is mentorship programs. Like, we all know the importance of being mentored and having someone help you navigate the complexities of an academic environment, a corporate environment, a startup environment. And without a certain amount of engagement, will people just default to mentoring people that remind them of their nephew or their niece or their younger sister or brother, and might that have some adverse impacts on people that would have otherwise had exceptional careers and opportunities? I don't know, but I'm to your point. There are some beneficial things, related to pre DEI, that did, I think, benefit people without creating disadvantage for others.
Yes, and the mentorships you talk about, outreach programs, a team of mentors, go from a college to a high school and have a relationship with that high school and those students. That is a much better use of the millions of dollars that was put into DEI, right? Apply it to these outreach programs and you will see actual improvement, material improvement, nothing symbolic, right? Real world stuff.
Yeah, I remember in the early days when I joined the team at Teach for America, and we were recruiting teachers to teach in urban and rural environments, and typically the teachers were predominantly white and the kids were predominantly Black and Hispanic. We did have an effort to try and racially diversify our teaching force, but what we did was that we encouraged that your pool that you selected from be very wide and a large number. We set these goals for, you want to be able to, if you're searching for a particular position, you want to make sure that your pool is racially diverse. But when it came to decision making, we left it to the managers to choose the best person. But we tried to make it so that we were traveling, I think, to Puerto Rico, like we were traveling to lots of different places to get candidates that you may not otherwise get, but the decision was yours, and really there was no pressure per se to choose someone of a particular racial background. So why can't we get back to that kind of rational, reasonable diversity?
I think we have no choice but to get back to it, right? I mean, the DEI, undergirded by critical social justice, is on the ropes, as you said earlier. We have to go back to a more sensible ideology for this kind of stuff. But I don't know what to call it. We can't use the word diversity anymore, or equity, or inclusion, or belonging, or anything
How
like
about
that.
agent?
So
How
I
about
have no idea.
agency? How about agency?
Agency.
That's the word. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So maybe this is a window of opportunity for us to, basically base our DEI on your book, Agency, right?
Sure.
and sell it like that, you know? Self-reliance.
Mm.
I love the concept. It's something that I appreciated since I was a teenager. Um, I remember reading Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance and, nodding vigorously with every line, you know? If we can instill or not necessarily instill, but show the benefits of having a self-reliant personality,
Yes.
the
Yes.
benefits of being an individual, right? And
Yes.
maybe not mention race right away, but talk about self-reliance, individuality, right? And the ability to hold forth and make an argument and participate in the marketplace of ideas and things like that. There are benefits to this stuff. We have to show why it's cool. We
Yes.
stopped doing that.
I
Erec,
run schools. Yeah, I run schools so our students can lead self-determined lives of meaning
Yes,
and purpose. Right?
exactly. Yes, yes.
Erec, do you think we should stop tracking racial statistics?
Interesting. I was having a conversation about this with a Cato colleague a couple of weeks ago, and his conclusion was yes. We need to stop doing that. And I mean, he went as far as to say that we should take, and I agree with him. We should take the race distinctions out of the U.S. Census, right? I kind of agree with that. I mean, I know it's a hot take, right? But I kind of agree with it, and the work of Sheena Mason, who I believe
Yes.
Ian, and
Racelessness.
Carlos Hoyt. Yes, racelessness. I think that's something. I actually just wrote an essay about it. I hope somebody picks it up. But it is, crazy, quote unquote, because we're talking about getting rid of the concept of race, right? That's a heavy lift. But I think if we start talking about that, we start promoting what Dr. Mason and Hoyt, uh, what those two are saying, and other people too. I mean, we have Thomas Chatterton Williams, and who else is talking about race? Camille Foster.
Yep. Yep.
These guys are people are talking about it. I think this has to be emphasized, right?
Yeah.
Racelessness has to be emphasized. That's our way back in.
I have to say I struggle with this because
Yeah.
just a week ago the nation's report card came out. Nique, I think I shared this with you,
Yes.
but the data is disaggregated by race, gender, and a whole bunch of other factors. But it shows of the nation's fourth graders in reading, the highest proficiency rate, the state with the highest proficiency rate of all black kids is Texas, and it's 27%. That is
Oh,
the highest. Wisconsin is 5%, right? I mean, it's absolutely outrageous, right? Now, mind you,
yes.
it's low in other races too, because this year we had record lows in terms of reading proficiency across the country. However, there is some value, or let me ask you, is there value in seeing that that's what's happening in the black community? Because one of the dangers is when you see data like that, you see that from the top state is 27% proficiency, which is horrible, to the lowest, which is 5%, which is criminal. The problem is people assume that the cause must be racial discrimination. And so that's why tracking information in these categories, while it might be valued to help people be woke, it's not necessarily valuable in the solution set that you come up with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, it does make sense. What's more, you know, talking about black people as a whole kind of misses the nuance of what's going on there, right? Because not all the black students are underperforming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not all the black neighborhoods are downtrodden, right?
Yep.
So it sounds like socioeconomic class is more of an issue than race
Yes.
by itself.
Or family structure in particular.
Family structure. I read a book once that said it was about family structure and religion and entrepreneurship and education. Um, I read that somewhere, but yeah, I agree with all that.
So Eric, we have a section in the podcast that we call the speed round, where I'm going to just present some names of people to you, and ask you to tell the audience which you prefer and why. So we're going to start with Malcolm or Martin.
Uh, Martin.
And why?
And why? And why? Well, I'm a rhetorician because I believe in civil discourse. I believe in civil discourse because it's what you need to prevent violence, right? We get skills in rhetoric so that we can argue with our words and not with bullets, right? And I still believe in that. And I think King had a similar idea when it came to writing and making speeches and things like that. And Malcolm was just tired of it. One of the most famous pictures of him was with a rifle in his window, you know, and I'd rather not have that be the situation.
So given that, Frederick Douglass or Booker T. Washington?
Frederick Douglass for the whole. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate Booker T. Washington. I appreciate Malcolm X,
Sure.
right? But let's talk about Frederick Douglass, self-made man. All right, the ultimate self-made man, right? There's actually a book published by Cato titled "Self-Made Man" that's about Frederick Douglass.
Oh wow.
His self-reliance, there it is, his self-reliance, his grit, his ability to overcome so much and be the most popular speaker of the 19th century in America, that is impressive. And it goes to show what the right attitude can do, right? What that self-reliance can do, right? What the value of critical thinking, the primacy of reason, freedom of speech can do. He used all that stuff. He was the consummate classical liberal, and that's why I choose him.
And then we'll take it up to the modern day with two more quickies. Joe Rogan or Tucker Carlson?
Rogan. He's just fun. He's more fun. You know.
Lastly, Elon or Steve Jobs?
Steve Jobs.
Tell us why.
I'm not entirely sure. I think because I'm sick of Elon, because he's in the news every 5 seconds, and Steve Jobs obviously is not with us anymore, so I don't see him as much. That's probably it, you know. But Elon is an impressive guy when it comes to technology and innovation. I mean, he really is. But I don't know what's going through his head sometimes.
Fair enough. Thank you.
All right. Well, before we get to our final question, where I want to ask you to give advice to this young man, Daryl, just tell us a little bit about what you're up to now as a research fellow at the Cato Institute.
Well, I am in the politics and society department, where I focus on civil discourse and DEI issues, right? Often, you know, the two combined, which is my favorite. But I write articles, I do talks all over the country, the world actually. And my main focus, right, is to promote civil discourse as something that we need to embrace, right? It's not just, we take it for granted that civil discourse is just talking. There are certain skills to certain kinds of conversations that we can learn and hone. And I want to make that clear. And I want to also talk about how civil discourse can be a valuable tool for dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, things like that. We're not talking to each other anymore, and I want to get that going again. I'm also obviously working with Free Black Thought to make that into something. And in fact, you know, why can't we get $50 million? You know, instead of, we'll show something for it.
Right. If Kendi can get it, he's a total grifter, right?
You know, we'll actually give you something, you know, in return. But, you know, now I'm just complaining. I'm going off the rails here.
So let me ask you, do you, in that work, do you see those needed changes to come through policy change or more cultural attitude, cultural shifts?
A little bit of both. To be honest, I'm focusing on cultural shifts. You know, I'm focusing on like real life interactions on the street. You know, people talking to other people, or at the dinner table, or whatever. I'm the kind of person who wants to see more debate in educational settings. There are schools that give scholarships for the debate team. You know, like it's a football team. We need more of that, right? Yep. And I want to help people realize we need more of that. And that's what I'm trying to do here.
Got it. Okay. Wow. Well, Erec, this has been phenomenal. Well, as you know, Nique and I started the Invisible Men way back when we were at Harvard Business School together, and in the wake of Rodney King, and we just got tired of this narrative that Black men are this endangered species and we're just going to be shot while walking, and just we live in this oppressive society, and we envision this 16-year-old kid, Daryl, Black kid, living in forgotten USA, And Daryl is always hearing this narrative. He's just always hearing, like, and so what advice, we ask each of our guests to close, what advice would you give to Daryl? What advice would you give to a 16-year-old Black kid who thinks this country is rigged against him because of his race?
What would I tell him? I describe my life, and and everything I've done to get to where I am right now. And I would I was about to get really nerdy and talk about stasis theory and rhetorical theory and all that stuff, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. All right. I am gonna say this. I would never tell him that racism isn't a thing. I would never tell him that there aren't people out there who automatically assume he's less than because of his skin color. I will tell him that none of that can stop you. None of those things are obstacles. They're annoying, for sure, but they're not obstacles, right? If somebody calls me the N-word in traffic, that doesn't affect my life. It annoys me for 2 seconds. And then I drive to the Cato Institute and be me, you know? And I would want him to do the same thing. Yeah, it's out there, but so what? Step over it like it's nothing. It's not a mountain, it's a molehill.
Yep. So what? So what? I love that. I love that. It exists, but to what degree? And it's not surmountable. Not insurmountable. Yeah.
It's not insurmountable.
Right. Yes. Erec Smith, a rhetorician. Yeah, rhetorician.
I've heard it all.
You've heard it all. Exactly.
I've heard it all.
Well, thank you for your great work and for all the great work you're just at the beginning to achieve.
Exciting.
Yeah. Thank you. It's going to be a fun ride.
All right. Wow. Well, our listeners have just watched a great episode of The Invisible Men. You can get all episodes on www.invisible.men. We're also now on all the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, wherever you find your podcast. So with that, Nique, great to see you. And Erec.
Great seeing you, brother Erec. Thank you for the time. Fantastic.
Yes, thanks for having me, guys.
All right. Peace.